Erev Tov, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to our final fall session. And we will return, God willing, with three sessions in March. So, but hopefully, we'll have contact somehow or another in between. But nice to have you tonight. And the topic this evening, these are the six questions. The topic this evening uh, is a difficult one. And the topic is, as you probably have seen, can non-Orthodox Judaism survive? And the way I'll give you the answer at the beginning, and if you're just waiting for the answer, then you can go on and do something else. And but the answer is, I don't know. That's the answer. I hope so. But I want to look at this from three different aspects. And tonight, I'm not giving any text on the screen. I want to be able to look at you. But I also want to give you opportunity, more so than in the past sessions, if you have reaction or questions or comments, because I'd like to not just hear from myself, I'd like to hear from you, if we can. And it's difficult to do so on Zoom. I will be talking about as part of the program, as part of tonight's topic, the issues related to pandemic life, and even now that we are hopefully starting to emerge, but we don't know. So, but nonetheless, it hasn't posed its own set of challenges. But I see this, uh, the way I'm viewing tonight, if we have the time to get through everything I want to do, is three different parts of the subject. One being the political elements of survival of the moderate wings of Judaism, both in politics and in religious life, the dealing with the resurgence of the right, and we will talk about that at the outset. And the second aspect will be the implications of the pandemic of COVID-19 on non-Orthodox Judaism. And that has imposed its very specific and unique challenges, many of which we are all living through. So we're very familiar with those challenges, but it has enormous ramifications, I believe, to the ultimate well-being of non-Orthodox Judaism, and we will go into that. And the final stage, if we can get to it, is basically the aspect of content. In other words, what are we offering uh, the Jewish world in the non-Orthodox communities? What are we offering that will enable us and enable the entire Jewish world to grow stronger? So, and that's a very significant challenge as well. But let's start with the political. And basically, a good jumping off point for this, and it's a painful one in many senses, but a very good example of the challenges that I'll call the moderate Jewish world. In other words, I don't like just saying the non-Orthodox Jewish world because then we're defining ourselves negatively. But the religious movements that are to the left of Orthodoxy, and that could possibly include modern Orthodoxy or the more liberal aspects of Orthodoxy, but certainly conservative Reconstructionism, Reform, and those who are uh, not basically Jews who define themselves as being outside of the realm of religion. In other words, often called secular, but Jews that consider themselves Jewish but do not consider themselves practitioners of Judaism, has become a rather significant element in the Jewish world. So, how do we, if I phrase this differently, what will 50 years from now will there be forms of Judaism that are vibrant, that are viable, that are not Orthodox? And that is really at this point an open question, and there's no clear answer. And I certainly would not say absolutely yes, and I won't say absolutely not. That's why I say I don't know. I don't know, but it's certainly a question that is challenging. Because what we're seeing now is a very significant resurgence of the right, both in religion and exemplified by what happened in the Israeli elections. And I want to spend a few moments on that, and not focusing on the uh, military aspects, not the political aspects in terms of dealing with the Palestinians. That's not for me. That's not my expertise, and it's not part of tonight's agenda. I want to look just from the point of view of religion, because I have to say that we're in a situation now in terms of Israel's new government that is close to being formed. Uh, the UTJ, the one of the major Haredi parties, has now come to an agreement with Likud. I think it's mostly done, and just the Shas is the only one remaining to come to agreement. And again, I'm not dealing with. I don't want to deal with the aspects of policing and other stuff that is not subject for this discussion. I want to look purely at the religious element. But what we have seen now, based on the coalition agreement and the 64 strong right wing government, as it's defining itself, and as Bibi calls it, a right wing government that is not friendly to non Orthodox Judaism. And that's really a very, very major understatement. And it's ironic because Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi himself, his first wife was a conservative convert in the US. And he personally is certainly one who identifies with non Orthodoxy in terms of his own life. He considers himself a traditional Jew, but certainly not an Orthodox Jew. And again, he grew up in the US. He's very familiar with North American Jewish settings. But for politics, in a sense, in order to build his coalition, he's had to ally with people that are strongly opposed to any form of Judaism that is not hardline Orthodoxy. And I'm not talking about Shar Shemaim Orthodoxy in Toronto. I'm talking about really severe Orthodoxy. So today, you may have seen this in the Times of Israel and in other media. The MK Avi Maoz, who is he's the only person in his party who joined with other religious parties in order to get elected, but he has become the minister of Jewish identity, and he basically today gave a very, very vitriolic attack on non-Orthodox Judaism, and I don't want to, I don't want to quote it because it's really ugly, but this is the person now that's given the portfolio of dealing with issues of Jewish identity. He also happens to be very, very profoundly homophobic, and more than that, he's just really very hostile to gays. He organized, when there was the Gay Pride Parade in Jerusalem, a march of animals from the zoo, intimating that people who are coming out as gay are not human, they're animals. And this now is a person that has a major portfolio in the Israeli government. But this is putting, those who are trying to hone a more moderate religious line in a very difficult position. Because we were getting pretty close, certainly with the last government, of achieving a great deal in terms of recognition up until now. But the new government wants to change this. Up until now, our converts have been recognized by the state of Israel. Not by the Rabbanut, not by the Orthodox rabbinic authorities, but that didn't really matter unless you wanted to deal with them on a particular issue. You want to get married by an Orthodox rabbi in Israel, it would be challenging. But if you wanted to make Aliyah and you were converted by me or by any of my conservative colleagues who are bona fide conservative rabbis or rabbis who are bona fide reform rabbis, the state of Israel would recognize that conversion for the sake of Jewish unity. But now what is likely happening, and that has been a commitment made to the various religious parties, that will no longer be the case, and the state will no longer recognize any conversion or any life status issue that is handled by a non-Orthodox rabbi. So, basically, so that I have to tell people, any of my converts that want to make Aliyah, do it very fast if you want to be recognized as Jewish. But really, in a sense, this is tragic. One reason being that we're not talking about a lot of people in terms of non-Orthodox converts that are making Aliyah. It's not like there's a mass movement of it's the truth is we're talking about a few dozen a year, maybe a hundred or fewer. It's not like it's thousands of people. But what it does, of course, is it sends a signal to the vast majority of the diaspora Jewish world that we don't consider you Jewish. It has the ramifications that go beyond the practical issue. The practical issue is really very small. If I took a shul group to Israel now, no one's going to be recognized as not being Jewish or not being recognized as being Jewish. But the idea when you're saying that, we don't recognize any religious function that your rabbis perform, it's not considered legitimate, it's not considered to be part of Judaism, that casts a very disparaging note on most of the diaspora Jewish world. So this is really problematic in terms of the conflict between Orthodoxy and the rest of the Jewish world. It's creating a gap, and unfortunately, we're not on the winning side of this issue for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, in the Israeli elections, moderate, the moderate parties did not get their act together. They did not learn and the right wing parties did. The religious parties knew they played great politics. They decided they were going to go in unified to the elections, and there'd be no lost votes. But in the left wing and the moderate to left wing, everyone played their own game, and and did not do well at all. In a sense, the Orthodox knew how to play their politics. So they're very good at it and very committed to their ideals, and I have to respect them for that. But it does, in a sense, pose an enormous challenge on the non-Orthodox Jewish world. And the reason why I'm putting this as part of tonight's presentation, which deals with a religious issue and not with not with politics, the reason I'm presenting it is that a lot of the Jewish world today derives its strength from identifying with Israel. And let's speak of the conservative world for now, if we were to not be as strongly identified with Israel as we are, it would weaken us totally. We love Israel, so it's not something that we have to fake. It's a very sincere love of Israel. From the day of its inception to this very moment, the conservative movement has always been Zionist, which was not the case with Orthodoxy. And still to this day, there are many parts of the Orthodox world that are not Zionist. And the Reform, it took them a while to get to that. They started off as being anti-Zionist. They eventually came around. We were there from day one. We were always a Zionist movement, but we are very dependent upon our relationship with Israel to strengthen us. Israel, why did I take 25 missions to Israel in my career in the active rabbinate? Why was that an important, and why did so many of my colleagues do that as well? Because that was a way of reinforcing people's Yiddishkeit. It was not simply just to see the wall and to see the Chagall windows and to climb Masada, to take the cable car, whatever. And that was all important to visit Israel and see the country in its totality. That was wonderful, but it was also to strengthen us, to strengthen our Jewish connection. So if there's going to be any weakening, God forbid, in that relationship, and I'm worried that these current election results could affect that, it will weaken us. We get, in a sense, we recharge our spiritual batteries with Israel, and we need that connection to be very strong and very and active. So any threat to that relationship does concern me, and I'm not using this is a matter of great concern. I've been involved in several meetings, Zoom meetings, over the last several days since the election with various leaders of our movement, and we have one next week with the conservative movement, reform movement, and the head of the World Zionist Organization, other significant Israeli leaders, trying to deal with this issue because it's of great concern. How do we keep that bond strong, notwithstanding the various negative aspects of the new government that's not going to be friendly to us uh, in terms of religious issues. So that's, a major challenge point. I want to just share with you a couple of quotations from David Horowitz, who's the editor of the Times of Israel, former editor of the Jerusalem Post, who is a moderate. He's politically, I would say, a centrist, and he basically is very, very concerned about the results of the election. And let's see if there's anything here that I want to share with you. Let's see. Well, he goes into the various individuals that are not part of the government. That I don't want to go into that right now, but I would share his concerns. But basically, that one, we're really worried that the change in religious tenor coming from the government and the lack of sympathy to where most of the diaspora community finds itself, and also a lot of people in Israel are very discomforted as well. So we're very, very concerned that this could affect our relationship and ultimately affect us. It will, again, our batteries get weakened if we can't recharge with Israel, which is so vital and so important, and it has been for 75 years, so much a part of our lives. By the way, I'm not going into the aspects where this really affects Israelis. I mean, I think part of the, one of the, just today it's in the news, the last agreement is no longer requiring that, there was an attempt at the last government to enforce educational standards in the Haredi yeshivot, in the ultra-Orthodox yeshivot, requiring that ultra-Orthodox kids learn basic skills, math and learning other English, or being able to function in the world, and that's no longer going to be required because the rabbis don't want that. They don't want them to learn that stuff. They just want them to study Talmud, and that's it, and halacha, and but it means they're really ultimately unemployable. And so you have the wives who are working in that world, and because they have jobs and they're supporting the families because the husbands are sitting in yeshiva all day learning because they can't do anything else. But that's again not our issue in particular. But we could spend a week or a month just on the various ramifications of the new coalition that are problematic, and it's this is a widely held view. But I'm only really looking at it from my very selfish vantage point of how it impacts potentially upon us and upon our communities. Again, specifically a couple of issues like we will probably no longer have our part of the kotel where we can have our own services under our auspices. That's going to be threatened right now, and likely not to continue, but not sure. It's to be determined. But certainly the non-recognition of our converts on a practical level is not a major problem because there aren't that many, but the symbolism of that can be very, very destructive. So that's one of the real challenges now that we face in terms of our ultimate longevity when Israel as a source of a spiritual rechargement could be threatened in the non-Orthodox world because of an estrangement that could be happening, and we hope with God's help that it won't happen. But that's a concern that has arisen in the last couple of weeks, um, and it does raise our level of concern significantly. Before I get to part two, I want to just see if any of you have comments. I know could be a bit controversial, so I will welcome any comments or questions at this moment, and then I will go to part two. I see. Okay, Anna, you'll have to unmute yourself, Anna. Good. Okay, you just remuted yourself. Okay,
Yes, okay.
good. There you
I
go.
started to write it, but is the government of Israel not concerned about losing the support of the many Jews in the diaspora because of their stand?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. Certainly the Haredi party, the ultra-Orthodox parties, they're not worried at all about it. I think Netanyahu, Bibi is probably concerned about it, but he has vested interest in having this government and being prime minister. It's also, potentially keeping him out of jail because he's in serious legal trouble. And this will forestall his being prime minister will forestall any kind of uh, ramifications of his own personal problems. Political leaders we know sometimes act in their own interest. and not always for the sake of the country. I think, again, in terms of his own feelings, he doesn't want any of this, but he needs these guys to keep his government alive, and he will not, and ultimately, he's not going to. That his priority is political survival, and ultimately, that's his ultimate priority. And even if that means having to hold his nose and make deals with people that he really doesn't like, he really doesn't like these guys. It's not that he, it's not him personally. He is concerned, but it's not his priority. And in fairness, by the way, this has been similar with other governments. It's just more extreme now. We've struggled for through the entire history of the state with a challenging relationship with the state in terms of unreligious issues. Our the state, our rabbis do not have aren't really able to function as rabbis in the country. They're not supported. Our synagogues are not supported at all financially, whereas in the Orthodox world, they are totally supported by the government. Rabbi salaries are paid by the government, not our rabbis. And that was, there was some hope that that would change, but now, of course, it's not. But ultimately, the concern would be some of the more moderate Likudniks in the 64 people that will form the government. Some of them were, they would be more sympathetic. Many of the Likudniks would not, but none of the other parties really could care less. I mean, they're just not. It's not in their wavelength. Bibi is concerned because he values the diaspora. He grew up in the diaspora. He values the Gola. He's very close to the American community. He wants to, be liked by the Americans. That's very important to him. He wants the president to like him. And the so but that's I don't want to go into American politics. That's we could spend a long time on that too. It's certainly interesting what's happening there, but ultimately it's not their priority. It's not their number one priority. Political survival is, and that's what happens when you're dealing with politicians. It's that's number one. The well-being of the world sometimes is number two. I mean, the politicians who will say that my real priority is the well-being of the world, they're the ones, unfortunately, who don't end up surviving politically, because they're not looking out for themselves as number one, and they may be right morally, but in terms of politically, it doesn't work always, and that's really the case here. So Bibi would care, but it's not his number one priority. Many of the other people in the government, the new government, will not care. They're not worried about the diaspora at all. It's not meaningful to them. I mean, there are a lot of political. Yeah, I'm not going into the strategic issues, the war and peace issues. That's really going to be problematic. I'm worried about all of the Abraham Accords and these other countries that have signed peace treaties. If some of the stuff that might happen does happen, that may be over. I don't know, but there's a lot of concern here. But I'm only focusing on the religious issue because that's really our agenda. Any other comments or questions before?
Yes.
Rabbi
Can I ask you a
Steri,
question?
Okay, one at a time. Who's okay? Let's Paul, and then I'll get everyone who wants. But Paul,
how would you respond to Abe Foxman?
Abe Foxman, that was really very interesting, and that came up in one of the meetings that was really kind of amazing, where Abe Foxman, who's the former head of the Anti-Defamation League, but not a liberal. At the best, you could say he's a moderate centrist, but kind of right wing leading. Not the new head of the Anti-Defamation League is much more liberal. He wasn't. He was certainly moderate. A staunch Zionist, but he made a statement saying that if some of the stuff that's being discussed happens, he's concerned about the Supreme Court and the meddling with the Supreme Court. That was As Dershowitz also, who's Farbrenta Zionist, but saying that he's not sure that he could defend Israel if Israel weakens the Supreme Court. That's another issue. Again, it's not totally our agenda, but I think Foxman's statement was very important. He was talking about if Israel becomes too right wing in terms and becomes homophobic and really turns to be if Israel becomes Iran basically, that he won't be supportive anymore. I mean, it's very that has to create shockwaves, because it's not like you're not talking about a Peace Now person or a J Street person who's saying this. Somebody who's really been towing the very strong, solid Zionist line. So it's very interesting that he said that, and he's a very prominent voice. But we'll see. But it's just people are on very different levels are really concerned about, it's again bringing in these three guys who are really extreme, One is a Kahanist, and who had Baruch Goldstein's picture in his living room up until recently. The man who murdered 30 Muslims on Purim several years back. That's of great concern to a lot of people who are really worried. Again, I don't want to totally sidetrack on this, but I would say that I think Foxman's statement was very interesting, and it certainly got attention, as did Alan Dershowitz, who again has gone pretty far to the right. He's become, he's allied with Donald Trump, which has not made him. He basically has no friends now because he was always too liberal for the right wing, but he's lost the left wing, so he's basically friendless. We tried to get Alan Dershowitz as a speaker at Beth David. You may not know this. About 15 years ago, we wanted him to speak on Yom HaShoah when we were going to read Megillat HaShoah. And then 15 years ago, his fee was $40,000 US. So I asked his assistant, I said, is there any, I explained what we're doing. No, not negotiable. I think today we could get him for airfare, but he's, but that's another story. And he doesn't, people don't want, at this point, he's lost a lot of his popularity around for various reasons. But he was, very staunch, and he's written several books on Israel. Very, very staunch and fiery advocate for Israel. Very, really upset and angry right now. Very interesting what's happening. And we have to, and as someone else advised me that recently, in a discussion, and I think they're correct, and I will see if there are more comments or questions, but we have to also just give this time. Sometimes what's said in pre-coalition, things get a bit quieter, and the changes won't be as dramatic as we fear they will be. But there are signs that, this could be a very challenging period, in particular for the non-Orthodox world. Other comments or questions?
Yeah,
Other people
Bernie.
want to speak?
Yes, Rabbi.
Bernie, go ahead.
Yeah. Rabbi David Golinkin,
Mm-hmm.
God bless him, practices what I strongly believe in.
Yeah.
And I find, unfortunately, the conservative movement is busy fighting rather than building. And he himself has gotten students involved and gotten adults involved. And I would like to see more of our energy directed on bringing more people into the conservative movement rather than worrying about all the possibilities that are going to take place with the Orthodox community. I would wait to see what happens and challenge at that point, but in the meantime, build up our support.
Well, I totally agree with you, Bernie. And as a matter of fact, that was only part one, which I'm going to end very soon. And I get to part two and part three, I'm not dealing with this at all. I'm not,
Okay.
I had two conversations today with Rabbi Golinkin. So I've been in touch with him on many issues in the last couple of days, and I just saw him a couple of weeks ago. So I'm very close to him and very connected, and I'm very supportive. I've helped support his work financially and other levels. So I'm very involved with him. I totally concur with what you're saying. I'm just saying is one of the challenges we're facing. It's my challenge number one of me is dealing with the realities of the resurgence of the right and how that does create a problematic for us. But you're right, that can't be our only focus. I totally
Let me
concur.
give you a
That's why.
second one then.
Hmm?
The editors used the challenge from the left. If you look back at Sharon, who was right-wing,
Mhm.
yet he brought the Jews out of Gaza, fine, but the left ignored all the people coming out of Gaza. So many of them ended up unemployed, etc. So if we're going to deal with problems, we've got to deal with both the left
Yeah.
and the right.
I think you could do a lot more of a lot sharper. I agree with you, but a lot sharper attack on the left than that, because that wasn't just the left. I think, I think Sharon, that was not handled well. The withdrawal from Gaza was, a lot of people would admit that it was not handled well, and it left a lot of chaos. And right, a lot of the people who were, it was not thought out the way it needed to be thought out, and it did not have the result that one wanted, which was hopefully all of the Gazans were then going to now take all of the greenhouses that the Israelis left and go into
Yes.
agriculture. They decided to use that to make bombs. In other words, their approach was to now use Gaza as Israel's withdrawal as a time to start sending rockets into Israel. It was mishandled on many levels, and I wouldn't just fault the left for that. I would fault everybody for that. A lot of beyond the left. There are other. I think you could certainly target the left on other issues. I'm only in terms of because I'm speaking about the challenges that of non-Orthodox Judaism. Part of the challenge is the resurgence and the strength of the right wing, and the weakening of the left. So it doesn't fit into this, but I concur if we're talking about there's plenty to, that we can blame the left wing for 100%. I'm not sure that I would necessarily do on the Gaza issue because I think that was a more widespread. The blame there has to be more widespread than simply on the left. I think that I don't think the right wing did enough to help. I don't think the government did enough to help. I don't think the plan was thought out well enough, and this is like 20 years ago. Um, so but I concur with that. I'm not using. I'm not an. I don't thrive in being an Orthodox basher. I pride myself on really wonderful relationships with the Orthodox community in Toronto and elsewhere. I've had the opportunity to meet some great Orthodox, and I'm, some of my best friends are Orthodox. That's a little bit trite, but I have no, I certainly am not in any way, but I'm just saying, on a very particular level, the resurgence of the religious right in a very, very powerful way does impose challenges on, and if we're talking about the long-term survival of non-Orthodox Judaism, I think we have a lot to worry about. And not only because of that. I mean, a lot of it's our fault, as I will get to very soon. It's not simply. I'm not going to blame. A lot of it's our fault. Probably most of it. So let's move. Oh, one more comment, then I want to move on to phase two. Okay, that's Ruth, I think. Yeah, hi, Ruth.
Yeah. I think why they went so far right was that the left was trying to take away all religion, and Israelis, most of them are not religious, but they do want their religion in the thing. So, but with all politics, the pendulum goes one way
But who?
and then it'll go back the other way.
But who was
So,
trying to take away religion? I don't understand. Like, how is they trying to take away religion?
they had started to say that they should have all the stores open on Shabbos. They should, and that
Let me be devil's advocate here for a moment and say, are you going to say, for example, that somebody who is secular, a secular Israeli, in a secular community, that they are not, could they go to the beach on Shabbat if they want, or should we not allow that?
well, they most of them do.
Well, the ones look, but the ones in certain communities, not in Jerusalem, but in certain places where they have buses that run on Shabbat. I don't. I prefer people not to use it, but I also feel there should be a certain amount of religious freedom, and people, so I would be. I think there's a good argument to be made on both sides. When you're trying to, then that's a very Israel problem. That's again not the diaspora. That's an internal problem in Israel. The
But
challenge
that's why
between.
I'm saying that
But they're not taking. But they're
because
not
of that,
depriving. But they're not depriving the Orthodox of their right not to take. They don't have to go shopping. In other words, it's not. They're not saying you got to shop and your shops in your neighborhood have to be open. They're not saying that. They're saying in a secular neighborhood, if they people there's something called freedom, and so that's why I'm not sure that I would say that that's a threat. It's not a threat to Orthodoxy. It's not a threat to the religious. That if non-Orthodox Jews are going shopping, it's their problem. You may want to convince them that they shouldn't shop. You may want to reach out to them and invite them to a Shabbos dinner, and that does happen, where you reach out and you try to encourage them to start to do Shabbat, and that's happening, by the way, in Israel in many places. And so, but I'm just saying, I'm not sure that I wouldn't. I mean, again, there's plenty that I would fault the liberal wings in Israel for, but I'm not sure that. I think I kind of, I'm not thrilled about buses running on Shabbat in Israel, but yet that I don't. I also don't want to say that I want to that we should be forcing people to observe when they don't want to observe, because that does not create a love of religion. And one of the reasons why there's such a large percentage of Israelis who are not in the religious camp is because they feel it's being shoved down their throat. There are better ways of achieving that goal. The shoving down the throat is not a great educational technique, and it does not create a lot of, it creates a lot of resentment and anger, which is unfortunate. I think basically part of what needs to happen, and it's not been a strong point of success, is conversation, dialogue, interchange, opportunities for people in the Haredi community and people in the secular community or in the less religious communities, more moderate communities, to have conversation. That dialogue needs to happen, I think, in order to realize that there are people on both sides. I have a very nice relationship with Rabbi Scheim, who's on the Orthodox Beit Din of Toronto. And he's a rather religious guy. He's fairly frum. No one's going to say, "Are you Jewish?" or did you put on film this way? He's a very frum guy. But we're friends. I have a very nice relationship with him. I speak to him a lot. And I don't agree with him on everything. He doesn't agree with everything about me, for sure not. But very, very warm. But part of that is because we know each other. We've gotten to know each other. We talk. We have conversation, and we see the human being in each other. And when you're just dealing in two solitudes where there's no relationship and no dialogue and no interaction, that's where the hatred takes over, and that's where nothing is accomplished. I want to see the religious communities in Israel persuade people on the other side to want to be more observant of Shabbat or more sympathetic, or introduce it, but in a loving way, not in a way of throwing stones, or not in a way of anger or yelling or screaming, but in a way, the way you show that you care about you recognize that they're in a different place, but you want to encourage them. But that's more effective than shoving it down people's throats, because that creates resentment and it does not achieve the result. There's not been a massive conversion to traditionalism among secular communities in Israel because of things that are forced down their throat. There's a resentment and anger and hatred that just makes the situation worse. So I'm not sure. But again, I don't want to. I want to move on to some other stuff, because I don't want to make this the whole focus of tonight. It could easily be, and it may end up being. I don't know. But I just think that I think that we need to have different approaches from and also, by the way, and I'm hearing what Bertie and others have said, that the behavior on the left and the ultra liberals is often really poor and inappropriate and offensive and insulting, and I think there needs to be accommodation and recognition on either side, in a different each camp, to say that there is more that we should be doing. There's more that we should be doing in order to bridge that divide, and it's not only in Israel; it's in the entire Jewish world. I'd like to see more possibility of accommodation. I'll give you one example, though, where I felt a frustration. When I'm sort of letting you in on something that's kind of confidential, but I don't care at this point. But when I was back 6 years ago as president of the Rabbinical Assembly, I was on this group that met every couple of months in New York, where there was representation. It was really very interesting. It was really amazing, actually. The leadership of every religious movement in Judaism was at this table, from Chabad to Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative, that was me, Orthodox, Modern Orthodox, Haredi, and Chabad. I'd represent. We were all there, and we were all very friendly. We'd sit for 2 hours and just discuss issues. And there was a possibility. There was quiet negotiation. And at the time, it was secretive, that the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel was going to meet with this group, which would have been revolutionary, because he had, up to that point, refused to meet with non-Orthodox rabbis. Unfortunately, the meeting never happened. In other words, there was discussion, but he never agreed to do it ultimately. Would not meet for discussion with people that were not part of the Orthodox or Haredi communities, which is unfortunate. I mean, that was and there was, because you had an instance where there was a dialogue taking place, which is not happening anywhere else in the world. Not happening in Toronto, by the way. There is no body where all of us sit together. That used to be with Israel Bonds, but even that broke apart. And there is no place where we all sit together. We have individual relationships, as I've described to you, but there's never been a communal place where all of at a rabbinic level, where all of the denominations sit together. And I don't want to get into pointing blame out here, but I'm clearly it's mostly on one side, but there's still some on the other side too that made that not work out, and it's really very sad and very unfortunate. I want to move into. I'm going to jump now to number two, because I think talking about the potential risks to the long-term survival of non-Orthodox Judaism, and here I'm going to basically be taking a different slant, because I'm going to say here that whatever challenge we face on this point is really of our doing. And that's basically dealing with the challenge of the pandemic of COVID-19 and how it's affected the non-Orthodox Jewish religious world. And it's very evident, by the way, that I did try to get this class back live, and it was not successful. We had in the last session we had 4 people who came out live, and then the rest of you were on Zoom. And I just on Zoom because it's too difficult. I find hybrid very difficult to do because I'm talking to people in the room and also talking to people on the screen. But ultimately, being live in the room is much more effective in terms of conversation. I mean, it's even as we see now, it's challenging, it's difficult because there's even a second page here that I haven't even looked at yet. But it's and half people are visible, half the people aren't visible on Zoom, and it's really difficult to have good conversation. It's much easier when we're in the room together. We all know that, and you can also have refreshments, but that's hard to do on Zoom. We haven't figured that one out yet. But so it didn't, and ultimately though, where orthodoxy has won here, and is that they were very less intimidated by the pandemic than we were. I think in a sense they paid a price at the beginning because they were, much more lenient in terms of restrictions during the pandemic, and the shuls were generally not closed only when they had to be closed. And it caused, certainly in the New York area, unfortunately, there were a lot of deaths because of that, because they really were not taking necessary precautions, and that was wrong. But I think the rest of the non-Orthodox world has really taken a long time to try to return to a semblance of normalcy. And I have to say that I'm no longer on the payroll of Beth David, so forgive me if I say that I'm not sure our shul is totally in the right position in this issue. And I would say the same for most of the non-Orthodox world as well, because the longer that we stay in hibernation and are dependent upon live stream and Zoom and not real-time gathering for prayer, it's going to be very difficult to rebuild. If we look, I'll just look at our shul for an example, but you can multiply this by many other congregations. I mean, we were blessed, for so many years with 2 daily minyanim. Up until the pandemic, we had 2 daily minyanim. But the few months before, we were struggling a bit at 8 o'clock. But we had those at 7 who would stay for 8, so we still would have 2 minyanim every weekday morning. Sunday we only had 1, and Shabbos, of course, 1, but we had, and that was very unique. I mean, very few shuls have 2 minyanim. And certainly in the non-Orthodox world, it was great. And if I ever write my memoirs, which is a fantasy at this point, maybe one day I will, I'd love to talk about comparing the 7 o'clock minyan to the 8 o'clock minyan. And there were some minyaneers here that are here today and that are on the Zoom, and they were very different. And to be honest with you, they weren't always that compatible. In other words, they were very different groups. They were they had the 7 o'clockers and the 8 o'clockers who were really, and they each were very close with each other. There wasn't a lot, and it was sometimes hard to get the two together because people really wanted, the styles were a bit different. But then we still had 2 daily minyanim. And now we struggle once a week to have Thursday mornings the minyan, even with an elaborate breakfast, barely getting a minyan. Evenings forget about, not happening. I mean, it did have a Ksudah Shlishi, which I understand was successful, thankfully. But we've been very slow to come out. And you go to Orthodox shul, they're packed on Shabbat now. Packed, I mean, like normal, like it was 5 years ago. I mean, I think part of that, we rightfully have been very cautious on the health level. But friends, go to York, go to a supermarket, go to Yorkdale, people are, life has returned to, people are not staying, masked and segregated and distanced for the rest of, people have returned, especially when you're dealing with people that have already gone through the vaccinations. And if you're vaccinated, the flu is more dangerous than COVID right now for people that are vaccinated in most cases. You should get flu shots. So I have to do that too. But I already had 4 COVID vaccinations. The thing is, we're at a safer point in terms of the pandemic, and at some point, the non-Orthodox world has been really slow to return to a semblance of normalcy, which I think is, in the long term, causing us great harm. Because I really worry about, will we have minyanim again? Beth Emeth, for example, This is the late Rabbi Kelman used to always say, "It's a good shul." I mean, he's always kibbutz with him. He said, "I'm my good shul." He used the joke. He said, "My shul is also a good shul." But Beth Emet, whose return has a morning minyan, but they're struggling to get an evening minyan. Adath Israel has both, but it's combined with Beth Tikva. So two shuls together, and they're getting a minyan, but just barely. And and it's very small in the main sanctuary because of it's distancing. They're not going into the chapel. Beth Emet is in the chapel. Beth Adath Israel is in the main sanctuary, seating 2,000 people, and you have 15 people spread over 2,000 seats. It's not ideal, and it's going to be very slow to rebuild to normalcy because we've been very, very slow to get back. And I think the pandemic is really causing us, and the response to it, the very slow coming out of it, is going to have long-term, very, very significant ramifications. I mean, let me predate the pandemic, predate COVID, and we know that the non-Orthodox synagogue world has been facing challenges for the last 10, 15 years. Aging communities, and the younger people that are not part of the frum world are not really into going to shul. It's not their thing. It's not a millennial or a Generation X kind of thing you really want to do. Shul going is no longer de rigueur. It's no longer popular. It's something that grandparents did, maybe their parents. It's losing its popularity. It's hard to get people to come to shul, before pandemic. But now that we've closed shuls, basically, and it's all watching it on TV or on your computer screen, it's not the same, and the rebuild is going to be really hard, and it's going to mean it poses the challenge that we have to find ways to reinvigorate our synagogue lives. In other words, to motivate young people to find a way to come to shul or to be somehow religiously involved, whether it's through learning, and that was going to be the third part of tonight if I ever get to it, of reinvigorating learning and serious Jewish engagement on a study level, so we become really create knowledgeable communities. And Bernie mentioned Rabbi Galinka, and that's what he's doing very effectively. We want to get, we need to get our communities into serious learning as well. But the truth is that our part of our immediate concern is finding a way to rebuild our communities after we've had a long period of absence. And it's hard. And I don't know if I think we're really going to struggle to get back to a semblance of normalcy. I hope Beth David will get back to having one morning minyan. I'm not even seeing that right now. And, two, I don't know if that's going to happen. I'd be happy with one. And the shuls that are trying it, they're struggling. They're getting it, but they're struggling. Orthodox, again, you wouldn't know there was a pandemic. And again, part of that was they were a little lenient at the beginning, maybe too lenient. But I think we've been too reluctant to return to a semblance of normalcy. And I think that the long term is different. And this is a bit controversial. Even within Beth David, it's going to be controversial, but I'm not on the payroll, so I can say what I want. It's nice to be free, But I recognize there's another side to this. People are very, very health concerned, etc. But I think there are, people who are concerned if you really consider yourself vulnerable, then you don't come, or you come and you come masked. Sure, but I do think at some point we need to return to try to rebuild our communities, and then to really focus also what ways are we going to creatively engage our young people. Other Beth David's had some attempt to try to deal with some social issues, and I think that's helpful. I think that's a good thing. But we have to make sure that we also are promulgating Judaism and serious Jewish engagement. So I'm going to sort of bring in the third topic. I'm going to merge the third topic with the second topic, and that is significant Jewish learning. One of our, and here again, I'm going to give full credit to the right wing. Again, I started out being a little critical of the Orthodox world, and now I'm going to be praising the Orthodox world to the hilt, and being critical of us, the non-Orthodox world. And this endangers our long-term survival because we're not showing significant commitment to serious Jewish learning engagement. I've been in one of my benefits of retirement has been the ability to be part of a daf yomi, to a daily serious Talmudic study. This is online. It's recorded, and I can watch the recording. It's a 1 hour recording emanating. The one I'm doing comes from South Africa, from an Orthodox rabbi from South Africa who I've gotten to know a bit, and it was a brilliant session, very high level, very good, really a wonderful learning session. There is nobody in the conservative movement who's doing that, or in the reform movement who's doing it. It's only coming out of Orthodoxy. There is one, somebody is doing a daf shavui in the conservative movement, a weekly page of Talmud as opposed to a daily page of Talmud. And to me, that's kind of lame. In other words, Orthodox can do a page a day. We can only do a page a week. So who's the serious Jew here? In a sense, I think we're going to have to follow the example that's coming out of the Orthodox world of serious Jewish learning, not just sessions on Jews and sports. The kind of stuff that, that sometimes have Sunday morning programs on great Jewish golfers, or stuff that's really nourish. But serious Jewish learning means, if you don't already know it, learning Hebrew, acquiring Hebrew literacy. We've already mentioned David Golinkin, his late father, Noah Golinkin, and Alav Shalom, who visited our community many times and introduced this one-day session, this marathon of Hebrew reading. We did it in our shul a couple of times. We had 200 or 300 people in the auditorium learning how to read Hebrew. Rabbi Golinkin, Noah Golinkin, David's father, and his wife, they were there, and they ran this amazing session. We had a packed room, and we did it a couple of times. And he was doing this all over the world, all over North America. He was going to community. Our session was the last one he did, and he passed away a few months later. But because his idea was that you need to really be able, to be a seriously learned Jew, you have to be Hebrew. You have to acquire Hebrew literacy. We need to increase our Hebrew literacy. We need to get people into serious study. If it can't be a daf yomi, a page of Talmud a day, because that's tough, let it be something else. But let there be some kind of serious Jewish learning, study of text, not just like making latkes. I mean, not the nourish stuff that we tend to do, and not just I give the example of Jews in sports. That was always a very popular breakfast program, or great Jewish comedians or something. I mean, I did a session on Jewish comedy, but I tried to do it with certain history attached to it and with a bit of depth. But you can do lighter stuff too. But there also has to be if every session you're going to do on Jews and sports, or baking humantaschen, you gotta, or making challahs, everything you do like that, which is good and we should do it, you have to make sure that you have a significant component of serious Jewish learning. Because if we're going to have a future in the non-Orthodox Jewish communities, non-Orthodox Jews have to become knowledgeable, conversant in Jewish text, to know the difference between a midrash, an agadah, and a halacha, to understand, basic Hebrew terminology, to have a sense of, a knowledge that is not a grade 2 or grade 3 level knowledge of Jewish life that they would have learned 50, 60, 70 years ago, but significant, an ongoing Jewish study, because that does happen in the Orthodox world, and we have to learn that from them. Another example, I'll give you another example, because again, I came down hard on the Orthodoxy at the beginning, and I want to balance that. And another thing that we learned from that community is that commitment. We are very good, and I think we have to continue in doing that. We are very good at awareness of communities outside of the Jewish world that need our attention and our outpouring, our help, our guidance, our support, whether it's the indigenous, whether other communities of color that Jewish and non-Jewish. But these are very important issues, and I think I'm proud of the fact that we engage in those issues. But we also have to put similar effort into sustaining Jewish life. And for example, I'll tell you a story. I'm going to interrupt myself with a story, and that is, I did a funeral a couple of months ago, and I was told that there'll be one person, one mourner at this funeral. Only one mourner, one person. There was no family. There was going to be one person there who was, not even a direct mourner. There was going to be like nobody there. So this particular individual had a friend who was connected to the Orthodox world, And that friend called me and he said, "Can I get the Minyan guys to come to the cemetery?" I said, "Sure." So tell me about the Minyan guys. And it turns out that the Minyan guys are a group, again, it's all men, so forgive me, but who they get a phone call and there's like a chain. They call each other, be at Pardes Shalom at such and such section, 3 p.m. on Wednesday. They all drop what they're doing and they come to the cemetery. And so the Minyan guys, 10 of them came to this funeral, made sure that the grave was covered, were there, and they were the nicest, the most menschlich people. The family, the person who was the relative who was there was in tears, was so moved by this. And I spent time, and they were just amazing. Why don't we have that? Why don't we have, and I don't let it be egalitarian, let it be men and women. Why don't we have, do we have people that we can get 10 instantly, like we'll drop everything? And these were not all retirees, by the way. There were some of them were young guys, they left work. But this was their priority, and they will go to, if they wanted a minyan in a shiva house, when we're now beginning to return to having shiva minyanim after a long interruption because of COVID. They do they do shivas too, and I was really impressed by that. That comes out of the Orthodox world. I have to give them the point. That's so. As much as we are, we're doing more than they're doing in terms of the indigenous. They're not doing. I guarantee you, at Shomer Shabbos, they're not doing land acknowledgement in their davening. It's shul. They're not doing it in Clanton Park is not doing land acknowledgement, and they're not being that cognizant of the indigenous. Certainly not part of their. We're doing that. Okay, fine, but learn from what they're doing in ways that really touch lives, and they can be very nice about it. See, that's what's missing if we go back to our original topic, in Israeli official Israeli orthodoxy coming out of government. It's not the nice guy approach. But I'm telling you, the Kiddush Hashem that these Minyan guys do is unbelievable. I mean, I'd like to even see again if I could, get. I mean, I'm not that directly involved in Beth David's day to day anymore, but if I could, I'm sure they would be very happy to come and help us set up a group like that to tell us, what they, it's not rocket science, but we need to get a people that will, with very little notice, be willing to drop everything and go somewhere where a minyan is needed in a very compassionate way, in a very gentle way, not coming in, shoving anything down people's throats, but doing it really very nicely, in a very menschlich, in a very menschlich way. That's Judaism, at its finest. So I think part of what we need to do if we're going to sustain non-Orthodox Judaism into a vibrant future is going to be to rebuild our shuls at some level and to find ways of engaging on a serious Jewish level, both in terms of practice and in study, that can make sure that we will also have learned Jews, we will also have committed Jews that will be there on the front lines when they are needed, when we are needed, when people have that need for that very, very important outreach. So I've said my piece for tonight. I'm gonna take questions and comments. I think who did I just I saw somewhere? Doreen, that's you're waving.
Oh, two things. I happen to know one of the people that puts out that call, and they do it on Facebook sometimes. He's modern Orthodox. I used to work with them, and yeah, it's terrific what they do, and it's something that we should be doing. But also about the studying every day. I don't know how many people are aware of what Women's League for Conservative Judaism is doing almost every day. It started during the pandemic, where we met at 12 o'clock every day, said a prayer, so that people could say Kaddish. There's about 50 people, 60 people off and on that still come out. And that we're down to 3 days a week now. We're Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. But we also study Torah. And the executive director is a rabbi They've hired an educational director part-time who's a rabbi, and these women are fabulous. They teach us either Tuesday or Wednesday. There's a lot of great discussions that go on.
Look about.
And
No, thank you for bringing that
Fridays,
up.
it's one of the women does the teaching.
That's great. That's great.
But I don't know how many people are aware that we're doing this.
No, I
And
think that's great. And, I have been aware of it. I know the people that are running this, and I think it's great. I do think though that we have to also what I'm advocating is a much more like I want to know be able for people who are going to be able to in our communities to be able to sit and study Hebrew texts.
you want us back in the shul doing it.
Well, that
We're
too, but I
doing it. We're
no, but
doing
no,
it
if
North
online
American
is
wide.
no. Look, I do my Daf Yomi online, so that's okay. I mean,
Okay.
it can be online too. But I also want to see study that takes place that's studying in the original Hebrew text and not simply like
That's what we're doing.
wonderful. Do people are able to read the Hebrew who are in the group and they study the text in
Yeah,
Hebrew?
well, I mean, the rabbi reads it. A lot of the women can read.
Okay,
Some of the things that are going on with Women's League is that they're teaching Hebrew to the women that want
wonderful.
to learn
Good,
it.
good. No, that
You
that
know,
50 has to become five. I think that's a good, wonderful. No, in general, I like to see our men's clubs do that. I think that in the at that level, I think that's great, and thank you. I think that's great, but we've a lot. There's a lot of work cut out for us in terms of expanding that circle of learning. But I think that's thank you, Doreen. I think that's good.
okay, I just didn't know how many people were aware of that, and it's fantastic.
Well, maybe that should be more widely promoted. I don't know if to expand your group. I mean, is that publicized in our?
Well, it is if you're a member of Women's League. If you're a member of Beth David Women, you get the emails from them. It's in there every week.
Also, it's also on every day on when we have this class on Facebook Live.
Yeah, that's true. If you miss the class on Zoom, you can just get it on
How
Facebook.
many of our women are involved in that, approximately,
From
Uh,
our
from us?
4, 5.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm delighted for the 4 and 5 you're doing it, but that number, I'd love to see that number being 50
yeah.
of our
Well,
people.
the entire group is like
No, I
50,
understand, but that's
and this is all
worldwide
North
though.
America.
But that's
Well, we
worldwide
used to
America.
be bigger, but
I'm
you
saying
know,
I think it's a great start. So my point would be that we have to expand that and 100 other programs like that. And but I think it's a great start. But it's a start. I mean, it's again a small. You have like we need when you have hundreds of thousands of people in the Orthodox world who are doing that kind of very
Yeah,
as opposed to 55 worldwide.
we're
It's a
small,
great
but
start, but it's just a start, and we need to grow that. But it's a great start, and I'm kol hatchalot kashot, all beginnings are challenging. So I kol hakavod, I full credit. I think it's great, but we need to promote it more and expand that kind of thing, but times 100. There'd be all kinds of different study opportunities that take place, and hopefully, again, at some point, returning to some kind of in-person engagement as well, because I think that's again part of the challenge of synagogues. If we want them to be around for a long time, they have to be populated again. But that's a separate issue. Some of this can be done online, but and I'm going to say that I don't think virtual davening is the same as in-person davening in terms of the connection. I mean, a lot of the I used to relish the fact that our minyan breakfasts were longer than the minyan. I could walk in, to the is it still called the Sisterhood Hall or is it not called the Beth David Women's Hall?
it still is.
It's like you have to change the name. We get a donor, the Goldstein Hall, get someone to give the money, then you can
Probably have to donate something to get the name
Right,
changed,
right,
right?
right. But I used to walk into the Sisterhood Hall, 10 o'clock in the morning, and the people were still there 90 minutes after the minyan conversing, like together. It was a major, it was a major part of people's lives. And it's not quite the same when you're on Zoom and you stay on for 5 minutes and you chit chat and then you're off. It's really, and at some point when that can happen, we have to work towards that happening again, because it serves a purpose that cannot be served virtually. But I do, I think what you're saying is great. I'm glad, there are beginnings that are taking place. There are things that are taking place, need to grow. We need to grow that. Orthodoxy gets when they do their every 7 years when you finish the Daf Yomi cycle, They rent out like a major stadium. They have 40, 50,000 people coming to celebrate who are doing the Daf Yomi in one place. We won't have 40 or 50,000, but I'd like to see us have a couple of thousand of people in our movement that are doing daily serious study. We need to up the game if we want to have a long-term future. I think also, I suspect that part of our challenge is, and I don't know, I didn't ask you in terms of the 58 women, what's the average age of the 58 women?
Yeah, we won't discuss that.
I suspect they're not in their teens. And that's by the way, I'm not faulting them. That's across the
No,
board.
the younger ones are probably late 50s, early
Yeah.
60s.
It's like when I did a funeral once, and the person who passed away was 106, and the grandchildren were all retired. So, which was, I'm saying that, we part of our, we need to get engaged, and that's a big challenge for us.
It is a big
We
challenge
have to engage,
because,
and that's not. I'm not going to pin this on women. So
yeah,
this is just going to fall on everybody. It's a big challenge, and specifically in the non-Orthodox world, but also in parts of the Orthodox world, of engaging people that in their 20s and 30s and 40s into some kind of serious Jewish engagement. We have a few, and even tonight's group, it's not a, I'm not so young myself. That's an understatement, but we're not. We have to, part of our long-term future is going to mean that we have to have people who will be with us long-term. That's the, that's part of the challenge as well. So,
Rabbi, you must be reading my mind.
it's a good read, Bernie. It's a good read. I like reading
Well,
it. It's a
the
good
point
mind.
I would suggest, if we want to save our conservative movement, we should try and target the 20 to 40-year-olds. And what our shul, if I had my control here, I would suggest using the computer identifying families in our shul who are between 20 and 40, and then having the professionals try and get them to relate with one another, starting off on a chavara basis, on a family basis. And if you have 3 or 4 families coming together, then they have a reason to come to shul. They're not coming as isolated individuals. And eventually they bring their kids at the same time. And then eventually you can start getting them involved in the study process.
Well, I think you're right on target there, but that will require, and again, it's not my.
We have the staff now. I don't know how they're using them.
No, you
There are
need
2
somebody,
professionals
but not
for
every.
programs. We
Yeah,
have a
well,
wonderful.
that's, again, I don't want to get too much into, I don't
Okay.
into the specifics of Beth David right now, because I have to be careful. Since, but I think the question of if we have the right staff to do it, or we should get it the right staff to do. You'll need a person who takes charge of this, who has to be the right person for it. Whether or not we have that person now, I don't know. But if we do, and I totally agree, we need somebody whose function would be serious engagement of, I'm not sure we're succeeding in that. We should be. And I agree with you. We have a lot of staff, but we need to make sure we have a staff person who will, or is going to be able to do what you're describing, will be working on young engagement. That hasn't, and it's difficult to find the right person for that. We have not been successful. You're right. I mean, that's essential, and to a long-term survival. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be around for the long term. There are other shuls that are making attempts to do that, some with success. We often talk about, a lot of our people, rightfully, understandably, go onto the Park Avenue Synagogue live stream, and because they have a $1 million technology budget, they spend more in tech than we spend in 10 years on everything. So it's network quality. I mean, it's the highest caliber. They have 5 rabbis on staff. You're talking about an empire, which we can never, and it's not, we can dream and not even be close to that. But they have, rabbis specifically designated to do exactly what you're describing, and they have some success, not total success, but we need to. That has to be, that has to be a priority. And you're right. I mean, 100%. I'm in full agreement. That's something that needs to be worked. That has to be a goal, a very short-term goal about doing serious engagement at a serious level, and not just coming out to have a wine tasting. I mean, and with all due respect to that kind of, it's lovely to have that, but there has to be, The kind of taking the example of what Women's League is trying to do, get young people to want to somehow get together in some kind of significant Jewish engagement that will be meaningful to young people. Learning again from the Orthodox community where they're doing like these minion guys and stuff like that, who are finding ways to, and they're getting young people for that. They're not, you have people that are, of all ages, but there are young people that are coming out to because they feel this is really something. They're making an impact. They have commitment. We're getting young people to come out in some of the social action stuff, which is great. But we have to somehow make sure we can also get young people to come out for serious Jewish engagement, because otherwise you don't have to be in a synagogue to do social action. You don't have to be, you can do that kind of stuff. Anyone can do. You don't have to be Jewish to do this. We need to encourage the stuff that you have to be Jewish to do, and and that will strengthen us in the long term. I think that's Stephen. That'll be the last comment, and then we're going to have to close.
Yeah,
Okay.
Rabbi, yeah, just on that vein, I won't be long, but to the credit of the people who have put together the interviews for the rabbi's position that we went through a couple of years ago, they ensured that there would be the 20s to 40s included in a private session with each of the candidates. And there were minutes taken of those, I believe, of those interactions, and were made available to the search committee and so on. So rather than reinventing the wheel, I'm just talking about Beth David specific, but I would think that the interviews and the points that were brought up by the young people as to what they feel they need or what they would like to see in terms of being engaged with the process and engaged with the shul going forward, that information is there and could be tapped by people in our in our shul environment who are interested in seeing that that segment brought into the fold. So it would be very interesting. They have that information as far as what these young people were bringing forward, what they felt they needed to be engaged. And I would think that it would be a model for many of the shuls, as you were indicating, in various parts of our community and beyond. So I think there's information there that's already been collected that would be worth pursuing, and could be as you say, have somebody who can press the right buttons and make it happen.
Yeah, my skepticism will be, though, only in the fact, and I think you're right, but it would be that of those young people that were involved in those discussions, how many of them are going to come out to something, as opposed to just giving opinions about what other people should, are they willing to commit to come out to those kinds of programs, and then it can work. I'm not sure. I don't know. That doesn't, because you want to make sure that it's not just saying what you think, what a great idea is, because I'm a young person, I give you a great idea, but is this something that you're going to do? And can you bring 2 or 3 or 4 friends to this activity? And then we know that we're onto something. And maybe that they can. I mean, I wasn't in those discussions, but maybe they can. But that's part of the requirement of that. You have to not simply have ideas, but being willing to, actually say, this is what I'm prepared to do. As a young person who wants to see a future for our community, this is what I'm prepared to do. And when do we start? So I think that has to go to a step further, not just putting ideas down. That okay, it's my idea, but I'm busy. I don't really have time for this. Because we've had that experience in the past. When I go back to my old memories of when I was still working, we had people who played, but there needs to be their willingness to this is something that I'm prepared to do. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to actually help set this in motion, not just give you an idea that you can do sometime. And maybe some young people will come, because a lot of that, how do we bring that to fruition and make sure that those ideas actually lead to meaning? But I also will go back to Bernie's comment, and I think it's very important that we make sure that we prioritize that this becomes a priority of a professional, at least one professional in the congregation that oversees this, to make sure it happens, because that's what, if something is important, you need someone on staff to be doing it. And I find this in my volunteer work as well, and with the Rabbinical Assembly and other things. Something is really important. There has to be someone professional who's going to be involved. So there is a lot of good stuff. I don't want to, and again, I think there is. I don't, I said I'm not sure about the survival, but as long as we're willing to do some serious work in terms of building a future, and then I think there's some hope. But again, we have a lot of challenges faced on the resurgence of the right in Israel, other stuff that doesn't help us. but we have to find ways of making sure that we retain our focus and retain our commitment and our involvement and into serious Jewish engagement. And God willing, we will be able to at some point, have proof that there's going to be a long-term future for us. I'll end with a reminder that people always say that 50, 60 years ago, or maybe now it's 70 years ago, people felt that there was no future to Orthodoxy. And even Ben Gurion, blessed David Ben Gurion, when he gave a lot of power to the Orthodox rabbinate, he was as far removed from religion as one could be. But he felt they'd only be around for a few years. It's a good, make them happy, fine. Like peace, they'll let us establish the state, and little did he know that they would become the strength and the power. He would not have expected that. See, we don't know. History has its surprises. Things happen that we don't expect. So let's hope that one of the surprises is going to be that there'll be a resurgence of the moderate Jewish communities as well. And the moderate Orthodox, non-Orthodox world as well will have a future along with the Orthodox world. And together we'll all be part of a one happy, large, continuing Jewish family. Ken Yehi Ratzon V'Namar Amen. And wishing you all a happy Hanukkah. It's not that far off. We're getting close. And Chag Urim Sameach. And hope to see all of you at different places and for good things. And thank you all for being so attentive. And wish you a good rest of the evening. And in a couple of days, a Shabbat Shalom as well. I'll leave the Zoom on for a little while, so if you want to talk to each other, bevakasha.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you very much.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. And likewise, good wishes back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay, good night.
This so much reminds me of the Waltons. Good night, John Boy. Good night.
We do, yes, we have a tendency to do that at the end of the service.
I know, look, it's cool.
And John Gooderman is one that usually does that.
Yeah, but God willing, one day we'll get back to doing it in person. But,
Well, so many
yeah.
things depend on it,
Yeah.
on getting that. I don't know. For me, the pandemic is still too strong.
But you've been vaccinated, I imagine?
Yeah, every vaccination
All the
available,
vaccinations, and
I've had all 5.
And if you came masked, there would still be a problem. But you've been coming to shul. You've come.
Well, no, I don't like to wear the mask. Not because I don't feel that I have to wear the mask. I will wear the mask even when people stop wearing the mask. I'm going to be wearing it until I feel it's safe to not.
That's fine. No, I think that's absolutely.
But the problem is that my limit for wearing a mask is 1 hour, and that's it. After, I barely make it through an hour.
No, I can relate to that. I can relate to that.
So I on Shabbos, I've started coming for the last 10 minutes and having coffee with people. And that's
also good. That's also good. But I hear you. I hear you. Maybe that someday things will improve to a state where you'll feel more comfortable.
Absolutely. I'm waiting for that day, and I do hope it comes sooner than later. But, the case counts are going up again, and so are the number of deaths. Not by a lot, but they're going up.
But this will be, this may be permanent. The fact is, I don't know. And that's the problem.
Because we keep moving ahead of ourselves. Right from the beginning, we just, we saw, things are looking good. All right, caution to the wind. And I think that's been our mistake all along. We're relying on the vaccinations, but they're no guarantee.
Well, I had COVID.
Now we've got flu and RSV and God knows what else we're gonna get.
When I had COVID, it was like I've had colds that were worse.
Yeah, that's not the thing. We think it's mild now. Okay, it takes a week maybe, and then we're okay. And then there's the long haul, and there's I don't know.
But let me pose the question differently. Like if you take a typical Orthodox shul, even in Toronto, they'll be having 400 people in shul on Shabbos. Yeah. You don't hear about mass outbreaks at this point of people. They're not super spreader events anymore, because you're dealing with a population that's by and large double or triple or quadruple vaxxed. And those who aren't, they're the ones who are more at risk than the people who are, and you're not here. I mean, whereas at one point you were hearing of people, go to an event like that and 30 people would have COVID. You're not, I mean, it's not perfect, but you're not hearing about massive. I mean, I think the flu is in a sense more right now more dangerous. And people aren't getting flu shots, and that's what I have to do too. But it's hard to say. It's I would rather leave. I want to rely on more medical professionals. I don't want to offer opinions and medical.
Well,
opinions.
the
But I
the
but I
doctors
hear
are
I hear
saying,
your concern. I hear your concern.
the doctors are saying we're moving too fast. And I haven't had COVID yet, and I really don't want it. Eventually I will. Maybe I'll get the flu. I don't know.
Some
But
people
so
have it and don't know
far,
they have it, by the way, because it's so mild. And I had it. It was like, I've had, again, I've really had it was, it, I couldn't. I was supposed to try. I found out because I was supposed to go to California for a meeting. This is a few months ago, and I had to take the test. Now, look, I have COVID. I wouldn't have known. And then I had a little bit of a slight sore throat, but it was really, but look, it obviously could be worse than that, so we have to be
yeah,
careful.
but
No, it's
okay,
it's
so
complicated. I
you
will admit that it's complicated. And
you didn't know you had it. You could have spread it.
yeah, well, those were still days that people were still being masked in public settings. But yeah,
So
no, that's true. That's by the way, that's always a possibility. But yeah, everything is crazy. But at this point, when you're, again, it's complicated. Let's put it that way.
yeah, even for myself, I'm doing things now that I didn't do before. I get together with people and
Hmm.
slowly but
Yeah.
surely, but still, I really do not want COVID.
Well, you're proceeding with caution, which is smart. But you are
There,
proceeding. You
very
are
much
doing
so.
something because you can't totally give up life forever. But
Well, yeah, and I
you're
have,
taking small steps, and that's fine.
I have,
You have
but
to do what works for you.
as far as shul, I think for me and for a lot of people, Zoom is a godsend. Maybe it's not as good as in
Well,
person.
it's a double-edged sword because it's very nice, but it's not. It could be the end of in-person services.
I don't
And
know. Right from the beginning, there were a core of people who started coming in person. They're still going strong in person on Shabbat, Thursday morning. You see the same people.
yeah, but it's not. You're
And
not getting how many people. I mean, it's how many are you getting on Thursday morning? I'm going to try to come tomorrow.
Thursday morning, I think
10?
there's a minion there.
Yeah, but it's barely a minion. I mean, it's squeaking past a minion. We normally would have had, in other days with the two minyanim, we would have had 40, 50. So it's
Well,
but
before the pandemic, we were struggling sometimes for the 2 minyanim.
I know, but we were still getting them. We were still managing to have two services, and if you put them together, we had at least 30
Yeah.
people at both, so combined. 20, there were times where it was much more, but it was struggle becoming more of a struggle. I gotta go because I gotta make a phone call.
Okay.
But we will continue this. Helen, nice to see you. Nice
Good
to see you.
night, all.
And I have two Helens here. So Helen M and Helen R. So both Helens, and great to see both of you.
Good night. Thanks again, Rabbi. It was very good.
No, great having you,
Very
and
good session.
goodbye. I don't know who on up is, but I wish you well. And
Yeah, I know. That was an odd one.
well,
I'm
on
still
up is
with
still
us.
on.
Still
So
there. Still
and
there.
Judy is hi, Judy. But okay, guys, we're gonna say good night, and
All right. Good night.
see you soon.